My perspective, when I look at what's going on in the world, it caused me to think and think about, growing up and where I came from. And I felt like I needed to share that perspective with others and to kind of give folks an understanding of the world through my lens, if you will. For me, I'm a colonel in the United States Air Force, the world's greatest Air Force. I've been serving for 24 years and counting. It's been an amazing ride. And when I think about the world as it is, and I think about my country, I think about the challenges that are currently ongoing. And so when I talk about this, I think about my dad. My dad served 24 years in the Air Force, and he grew up in Mississippi, born in 1949, born in a time when segregation was the law of the land, that blacks were not treated equally. He wanted to do better for himself. He wanted to do better for his family. He applied to be a state trooper in the state of Mississippi. They personally returned his application because there were no black state troopers in the state of Mississippi. And we're talking in 1968 timeframe. Vietnam was going on. And so you dial it forward just a few years later, and my dad joins the United States Air Force in 1971. Segregation had ended, but there was still a lot of racial turmoil in the country. Vietnam was going fast and furious, and yet he served. He volunteered to serve this nation. I'm sure he never thought about serving 24 years, but he did. And, when I look at my dad, I look at someone who, what I refer to as that crusty NCO. He is the epitome of what you expect to see in a Master Sergeant of the United States Air Force. And he raised his son and his two daughters, with respect for the nation, with respect for the country. I remember being a kid, we were at the movie theaters on base. And, movie theaters on base, they always play the national anthem to start the movie. Everyone comes to attention. And there was a young airman who had his baseball cap on. My dad saw that and walked over to him and made it clear that he needed to remove that cover. Why? Because it was disrespectful to the country. It was disrespectful to the service. But that's how he was. I grew up as a military brat. I was born on an Air Force base. I lived on Air Force base my entire life. The kids I played with, some were minority, a vast majority of them predominantly white. I never thought about that. I hung out with the kids who were in my neighborhood because on base, the kids played with the kids. There were no rules like that. You just had fun. However, when you left the gate, there were different rules. You had to think about things differently. How you interacted with people, how you walked through the stores, the things that you don't think about when you're just a kid playing on base. As a kid growing up, my dad refereed basketball. I used to go with him to basketball games, and there were places that we would go to when we were stationed at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho, where the first black person that anyone had seen in person was me and my dad. The first time. And so their perspective of any African Americans, what they may have seen on TV. And so by interacting with people, by talking to them, you not only impart a different perspective on them about you, but you also get a different perspective about them. I'm not a small person, right? I'm about 6'2", fairly well built, African American. And to the world, to this country, in some instances, I'm a threat. So my interaction with anyone is, you have to be evaluated on the sense that I am guilty until proven innocent. And so, you get pulled over by the police officer. One of the first things I always do is, along with my driver's license, I'm pulling out my military ID card. Why? When I'm in uniform and I'm walking around, people who I don't know will walk up to me and say, "Thank you for your service." They will say, they may not know what service I'm in, but they will always say, "Thank you for your service. We're proud that you're serving us. You're proud to be a part of this country. Thank you. Thank you." I take off that same uniform, and there's going to be people who will see me coming, lock the doors, cross the street, not treat me like I'm just a normal person walking down the sidewalk or driving in the car. And so really, my ID card is a part of that safety net. As a kid, having the green ID card, as an adult, being on active duty, having the white one. I used it because it showed that I am not a threat to you, that, I serve. It's unfortunate that I have to do so, but it's absolutely necessary for my own safety and my own survival, because I don't know what's going through their mind when they look at me. When I see a kid who's just jogging through a neighborhood, and I think to myself, this kid was killed because he happened to be jogging through a neighborhood. And I think of the number of times doing my standard, which is, trying to stay in shape, trying to stay physically fit. And I get up first thing in the morning, early, and I go for a run. I don't think at the time, but now when I look back on his incident, the likelihood that it could have happened to me, that someone could have just seen me jogging, and because of the color of my skin, because of my size, because of who I am, they decide that I'm a threat and come after me, right? For doing nothing more than doing what I'm supposed to do. So I have a son. He is a brilliant kid. He's not a kid anymore. He's in his last year of law school. Honor student through high school, top graduate in college, now at law school at my alma mater, University of Kansas. And when I look at him and I see this incredibly talented kid, and he's going through the same things that I am, right? That we have to have the conversations about how you interact with people, that he is also falls around in stores, that he also has to deal with the same kind of challenges that his dad and his grandfather had to deal with. It's disheartening at best to see that my son has to go through the same things that I went through and my father went through. Even when I talk to my daughter, who is in high school, and we talked about the things going on, and she tells me that, "Dad, same things happened to me." And so I thought about that for my son, but until I had that conversation with my daughter, I didn't realize that it happens to her too, that she's seen differently. And it's one of those things where you thought about it, but you don't feel it until I'm talking to my daughter. And she is feeling the same pain. that her brother feels because she's treated the same way. I've served 24 years. My dad served 24 years. That's 48 years of service. My son's maternal grandfather served 30 years. He's actually a retired colonel. So think about that. 78 years of service amongst 3 men, 2 different generations. And the one thing that you can talk to us about is about serving our country, serving and putting service before self. To think that upholding the Constitution and all that it entails is the most important thing, and being willing to give our own lives because of that, because of what it promises. We grew up and came up in this country where those constitutional ideals weren't necessarily always playing out, but we still had hope because we have a cultural challenge. Racism is a part of the American culture. It is ingrained. The only way you bring it out, the only way you get rid of it is to change the culture. Well, how do you change culture? You have to have that social interaction. You have to have people that's willing to come forward and talk to each other. There needs to be an opportunity to have that pause where airmen in small groups just kind of talk about where they came from, the perspectives that they had, and the challenges that they faced. Because then you're going to learn from each other. And then you're going to learn about the challenges that they faced growing up. And once you hear that, and once you hear their story and their perspective, then you can get that interaction. And so I think that's an important aspect of what we do that needs to happen. We got to talk. But we have to have those hard conversations about growing up and what did we see, the challenges that we faced growing up, the hardships. If we're willing to learn, we're willing to get better. But you got to have an open mind and you got to listen. And you have to listen to each other. And so for me, what would make us better as a service, as a nation? Let's talk. Let's interact. Let's discuss our perspectives and listen. More important than anything else, we got to listen to each other.